Hi everyone, I'm Any New Province, and this week we're going to find out if Healer's Hawk is possibly Pauper Playable. I am super excited to take this white weenie deck out this week because it comes from one of the friends and viewers of the Possibly Pauper Playable series. This deck, a deck named Healing Winds, comes from Terry Core, aka Tactical Terry, and you may be familiar with them from some of the bonus viewer matches at the end of some of my streams. I'm confident in this deck's performance because Terry used it to come second place in a 39-person Pauper tournament organized by the Pauper MTG Facebook group. Congratulations, Terry. This deck's strategy is to flood the board with a lot of tiny creatures, anthem them for a win, or gain so much life that your opponent has absolutely no way of killing you in the meantime. Before I get into Healing Winds, I just want to let you know that you can like the video or subscribe to the channel down below. I'd seriously appreciate it. It's a great way of letting me know that you've enjoyed everything, and it really encourages me to keep making great Pauper content. Alright, let's get into Healing Winds. First up, we have Healer's Hawk, the Guilds of Ravnica common we're focusing on this week. It costs 1 white mana for a 1/1 with flying and lifelink. Healer's Hawk is already proving its mettle in formats besides Pauper. However, I can see how powerful it can be in our format. It starts getting in that evasive damage early, and while it does that, it buffers your life total against any other opposing aggressive strategies. Evasion was really important to Terry while he was building this deck, and that's why our other creature-based threat is Squadron Hawk. It costs 1 and a white for a 1/1 with flying, and when it enters the battlefield, you may search your library for up to 3 cards named Squadron Hawk. You can reveal them, put them into your hand, then shuffle your library. Squadron Hawk is Brian Kibler's favorite bird for a reason. This is a way for mono white to generate card advantage because you draw 3 extra copies of Squadron Hawk after you cast your first one. It goes along really well with our evasive plan and some of the other spells in our deck. One of those spells happens to be the first part of our next package, our white creature token generating package. That spell is Battle Screech. Battle Screech costs 2 white for a sorcery that creates 2 1/1 white bird creature tokens with flying. It also has flashback, which means you can cast it from your graveyard by tapping 3 untapped white creatures you control and then exiling it. White decks like this tend to kind of burn themselves out if your opponent has a way to answer all of the X ones. However, the synergy between Battle Screech and Squadron Hawk is after you cast your Squadron Hawk, you can go get a few more to put on the battlefield to flashback the Battle Screeches in your graveyard and get those beats moving again. Sometimes evasion isn't enough to attack around your opponent's board. They may have things like Glinthawks and Core Skyfishers. That's why we're going wide as well, and this next spell helps a lot. This is Triplicates Spirits. It costs 4 white for a sorcery with Convoke, which means your creatures can help you cast this spell. Each creature you tap while casting this spell pays for 1 generic mana or 1 mana of that creature's color. It creates 3 1/1 white spirit creature tokens with flying. We're going to be committing so many bodies to the battlefield that by turn 3 or turn 4, Triplicate Spirits is going to cost barely anything at all. If your opponent can't answer it, they're just going to die to all that evasive damage. Playing a lot of 1 power and 1 toughness creatures on its own is generally not a winning strategy. We've got to back it up with some other backup plans. One of those backup plans is to make them bigger than 1/1s to kill your opponent a little bit faster. One of the spells we're going to use to do that is Guardian's Pledge. It costs 1 white for an instant that gives white creatures you control +2/+2 until end of turn. In the early turns of the game, our little creatures are going to look super unassuming, so our opponent might take a turn off from interacting with us to develop their board. Guardian's Pledge is going to change the clock. We're going to get to slam this while our opponent is shields down and kill them out of nowhere. We're also running 2 copies of Ramosian Rally as anthem effects. It costs 3 and a white for an instant, but if you control a plains, you may tap an untapped creature you control rather than pay this spell's mana cost. It gives creatures you control +1/+1 until end of turn. I think we all know how powerful free spells in Pauper can be, and Ramosian Rally is definitely part of that club. It helps us hedge from main board electricities, and it helps us win out of nowhere even when we're tapped out. Sometimes the backup plan of just making your creatures a little bit bigger to win the game faster isn't going to do it, so Terry has a whole other backup plan included just in case. That plan is to gain so much life that your opponent has no way to kill you through damage, and our life gain package starts with Survival Cache. Survival Cache costs 2 and a white for a sorcery that gains you 2 life. Then, if you have more life than an opponent, you draw a card. It also has the rebound ability, which means if you cast this spell from your hand, you exile it as it resolves. At the beginning of your next upkeep, you may cast this card from exile without paying its mana cost. Survival Cache is by far one of my favorite life gain spells, and that's because it comes with a divination attached if the right conditions are met. Our life total is almost always going to be higher than our opponent's, so this will almost always draw us a card. Speaking of gaining life and drawing cards, we're running 3 copies of Revitalize. It costs 1 and a white for an instant that allows you to gain 3 life and then draw a card. Revitalize is going to help us smooth out our draws while backing up our life gain plan. I really like how this card fits in here, and I'm not surprised to see it. If those last 4 cards weren't enough life gain to keep us alive while we kill our opponent with weenies, this deck is also running 12 Soul Sisters effects. Our first Soul Sister is Soul Warden. It costs 1 white mana for a 1/1, and whenever another creature enters the battlefield, you gain 1 life. We also have 4 copies of Soul's Attendant, which is functionally the same as Soul Warden, or mostly, because you may gain the life whenever the creature enters the battlefield, but I can't think of a situation where you wouldn't want to. And our last 4 Soul Sisters are Suitor Priests, which costs 1 and a white for a 1/1, and whenever another creature enters the battlefield under your control, you may gain 1 life. Whenever a creature enters the battlefield under an opponent's control, you may have that player lose 1 life. Our Soul Sisters are definitely going to gain us a ton of life with all of our token production and our Squadron Hawks, and Suitor Priest's second ability is some added gravy, just in case our opponent is on a heavy creature deck, especially something like elves. Sometimes gaining a bunch of life and attacking your opponent for the first couple of turns of the game aren't going to finish things, and for that reason, we do have a few spells that are going to interact with what our opponent's doing across the table. First, we have 2 copies of Lumathread Field, which is going to hedge against those main board electricities and also allow us to attack through Augur of Bolas eventually. Lumathread Field costs 1 and a white for an enchantment and gives creatures you control +0/+1. Finally, our last non-land cards are 4 copies of Journey to Nowhere, some main deck removal for creatures we really have to deal with. Journey to Nowhere costs 1 and a white for an enchantment, and when it enters the battlefield, you exile target creature. When Journey to Nowhere leaves the battlefield, return the exiled card to the battlefield under its owner's control. Hopefully our opponent won't be able to remove our Journey to Nowheres, and we'll get to lock down a creature we need to. Alright, let's have a look at this mana base. It's nice and simple. We just have 4 non-basics in Kabira Crossroads. They enter the battlefield tapped. When they enter the battlefield, they gain you 2 life. We have 15 basic planes besides that, just lots of untapped white mana for casting our 1-drops. Alright, let's have a look at this sideboard. First, we have a few copies of Leave No Trace because it's an absolute beating against Boggles. We have 2 copies of Relic of Progenitus for hating out graveyards and slow matchups, 2 more copies of Lumathread Field if our opponent is on a red deck with lots of Wraths. We have 4 copies of Prismatic Strands for fogging out green decks or for stopping our opponent from wrathing our board. We have 2 copies of Holy Light to wrath X1s on the other side of the battlefield, and we have 2 copies of Standard Bearer for picking up all of our opponent's auras and pump spells. And there it is, Healing Winds by Terry Core. Thank you again for this deck list, and congratulations on your finish in the Pauper Facebook tournament. We're going to take this deck into a league this Tuesday night at 7 p.m. Atlantic time at twitch.tv/AnyNewProvince. We're there every Tuesday night playing Possibly Pauper Playable decks. Before I go, I just want to remind you that you can like the video or subscribe to the channel down below. I'd seriously appreciate it. It's a great way to let me know you've enjoyed everything, and it really encourages me to keep making great Pauper content. Thank you so much for watching. I hope you enjoyed this deck tech, and hopefully I'll see you on Tuesday night.